But the good news is all the lanes are back open now. Also on the M25, anti-clockwise queues to junction 9 at Leatherhead after an accident. One lane stays closed, and also long delays on the M25 anti-clockwise to the M4. That's junction 15 after an accident. At London City Airport, some flights have been cancelled or even diverted because of the strong winds, so definitely do check with your individual airline. LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
It's 10 o'clock on the 4th of January. This is Sadiq Khan and LBC. Happy New Year. I'm here for the next half an hour or so taking your calls. This is your chance to put any question you like and I'll do my best to answer it. So the numbers for you to get your questions on the air are 0345 6060973, or you can email sadiq@lbc.co.uk, or you can text on 84850. Don't forget you can watch me speak to Sadiq on LBC Live on Twitter or Facebook. James, how are you?
Very well. Happy New Year, mate.
You too, mate.
It's very nice to see you. I forgot that they can watch us on Twitter or Facebook. I wonder if people will be able to detect the change in my physical appearance as a result.
We can tell James you've forgotten. They can watch you live on HD, and yeah.
Indeed they can. Shall we kick straight off? I would add that probably a better opportunity than at any other point in the coming year to get through, because we forgot to mention yesterday that you were coming on.
I'm not offended at all.
Are you sure? It was only the second day back. So 0345 6060973. I, as ever, reserve the right to pile in with supplementaries, but the Mayor is on the end of the phone line and he will answer your questions.
Good morning, Danny. You're the first caller of 2018. Danny in Ilford. Hi, Danny.
Good morning. Good morning, Sadiq.
Good morning, Danny.
My question is...
Please.
What are you really going to do about knife crime? I asked you this question at Dagenham, and unfortunately I was told to be quiet, and you answered it in a roundabout way. Sadly, the questions that and the solutions you're coming up with, we've tried for the last 10 years. I've been a campaigner for 10 years. I haven't seen you actually have a meeting, a proper meeting at anywhere that brings in families of victims. And also, you seem to choose on your campaign, your last campaign that you've done, you seem to have handpicked who spoke out for you.
Well, Danny, look, I mean, I've had a number of meetings on this issue, as my deputy mayor, but what are your solutions that you think we aren't considering? I'm keen to hear them.
Well, the knife ones.
Yeah, come on, what are they?
Basically, knife ones is a good solution, but haven't schools, who's going to pay for them?
Well, let me answer that directly. So I've now agreed to pay for knife wands for every school in London that wants one.
Just explain what that is.
So a knife wand, basically, if you go through an airport, it's a metal detector thing. It's like a stick. It's a wand, and it can catch somebody with a metal or a knife wand. So what I've done, Danny, is last year when the new term began, we wrote to every school, secondary school in London and college, offering a free knife wand. I'm paying for them, using your taxpayers' money. The good news is 76 have agreed to have one. That's fantastic. We've written out again this week encouraging other schools to have one. So you're right, it's important for schools to have this. Why? Because we want schools to be safe places for our young people to go to, and I don't want a school to think they're being labelled a bad school for having a knife wand. It shows a school taking safety seriously.
Come on. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but if your daughter's had a choice between two schools, one of which routinely employed knife wands and one which didn't, there's no question in your mind about which one.
Let me show you why we've got to change that way of thinking, James. I want my children to go to schools knowing they're looked after, whether it's from sexual grooming, whether it's from being radicalised by preachers of hate, whether it's been the victims of knife crime. We need to make sure we invest more in prevention and education. So, and we're doing that, Danny. So we've got a comprehensive plan which we're rolling out across the city, not just involving the police being tough on enforcement. In November and December alone, they made more than 900 arrests. A third of those were because of good use of stop and search, more than 350 seized, but also invested more in youth facilities, more in community centres, more in A&Es, more in youth work, more in knife wands, more in school safety support officers. So I'm happy, though, Danny, to listen to any suggestions you have, because this is a serious problem. The bad news is on December 31st, 4 further Londoners were stabbed to death. And so I'm all ears in relation to solutions, but I've got to say this, though, it doesn't help when we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years 30 youth centres closed down across London, 30% of youth services cut from local authorities, more than 12,700 young people who used to go to youth club no longer able to go on because youth clubs have closed down.
And so have police stations. What are you actually responsible for?
We're responsible for the police and budget in relation to how we use the money given to us by government.
So
and also
you take the decision to close police stations?
Yeah, so the way it works is 70%, roughly speaking, of Met Police funding, 70, comes from central government. The rest comes from council tax plus applying for individual sources of funding. And the choice I've got is a very simple one. Bearing in mind we're facing a billion pounds worth of cuts, choosing between buildings or officers. I'm choosing the latter, police officers, but it's still the case, I'm afraid, police officer numbers are going to go down because of government cuts. I'm doing what I can to make sure we have more frontline officers.
Would you draw a direct causal link between the economics and the deaths?
Firstly, the criminality shouldn't be excused. Somebody carrying a knife is committing a criminal offence. We shouldn't excuse it. We've got to understand it and explain it. And I think there is a cause and effect between lack of prevention, lack of education, lack of rehabilitation, youth centres closing down, young people not having positive role models, and more young people carrying knives. And that's why it's important, Danny.
Why are they?
Right. Sadiq.
Go on, Danny. Back to you, mate.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, briefly.
Of course you can.
Right. The question is I've done a campaign for the last 10 years. Unfortunately, I've never actually had a one-to-one with you. Okay? I'd like to, on air say, can I have a meeting with you on a one-to-one and bring a mother along who's lost her child? And also, can you look at the way the shops are still not tagging their knives in the high street?
Do you have power to control that?
So
can you order Robert Dyers to put tags on all their carving knives?
Firstly, offline, can we, Danny, to give us the details?
Yes, of course. Stay on the line, Danny, and we'll sort that
arrange
out.
for the Deputy Mayor or me to meet with you. And I met actually at the Ilford meeting, Danny, at the Eastland meeting, I met a bereaved mum who'd lost her son through knife crime and spent time with her, and she's helping now Barking and Dagenham Council. What we're doing, James, is police officers are doing spot purchases. They're going to shops to see whether retailers are being sensible, not selling to children. Obviously, it's not it's a younger police officer making sure that happens. Also, on the internet, these so-called dagger knives and zombie knives being sold on the internet. So there are things we can do to make sure retailers are acting responsibly. Some councils are also have model schemes. Croydon is a very good model scheme, working with the trading standards to make sure retailers are responsible. The bad news, though, is any young person, unless they understand the dangers of carrying a knife, can pick up a knife from their kitchen. These are household items we have, so we've got to be realistic about the availability of ordinary knives. That's why education and prevention is so important.
Okay. I live in quite a leafy part of London, quite a middle-class enclave. Our police station is closing. There's going to be no front desk. So I'm wandering up Chiswick High Road. I see some kids kicking off at the bus stop, as I have done. I haven't seen one pull a knife, but if I did, in the past, I'd have crossed the road, walked into the police station, told someone at the front desk.
To be fair, though, James, to be fair, the evidence isn't the case that you would have done that, because some of our police stations are used 8 times a week. So what you'd have done is ring 999. I'm not trying to tell you what you'd have done. Sorry, I'm not being 999. Ring 101 if it's not an urgent, or ring Crime Stoppers if you want to be anonymous on 0800 555 111. Or you can do it via your phone using social media.
Okay. No, that's
other ways
comment.
to get in touch.
That's fair comment. But there has been, because this is perhaps it's a case, as it typifies a lot of British politics at the moment, of the public, people like me, perhaps not fully up to speed with modern changes. You've made a conscious decision that manned police desks in police stations are not cost effective. It's not just because of the cuts. Even without the cuts, you'd rather be spending the money on bodies, but of course with the cuts the number of bodies is going to go down anyway.
My view is police stations have an important role to play in our communities. We feel safe. We feel safe.
That's completely glib. Police stations have an important role to play in communities.
We feel safer than being there. Some people haven't got access to a phone. That they sometimes want to speak to somebody. They could be the vulnerable victim of crime, especially sexual offences. They need a police officer to speak to in a safe space. So every borough will have at least one police station. Really important to have a front office counter. But you're right. People now are more sophisticated in how they report crimes. They use a phone, they use text, they use social media.
Okay, no, I hear that.
What we want is, if the choice is a building or an officer, I will choose an officer.
It's the biggest number of teenagers killed since 2008, and it happened on your watch. And this was a campaigning pledge. This is politically and personally disastrous and disgraceful. There's no spinning it. There's no getting out of it. I appreciate you haven't stabbed anybody yourself, but if you campaign saying you will bring it down and then it goes up exponentially, some of that has to stick.
Well, it's catastrophic for these bereaved families, by the way.
Of course.
Not just me. I mean, my political prospects are...
No, but they're not here, Sadiq Khan. You are. I'm talking to you and about you.
But I speak to them all the time, bereaved families. And the knife crime plan we published last summer was as a result of speaking to bereaved families, experts, ex-members of gangs, people who are involved in this area, specialists, Ofsted and many others. And that knife crime plan is doing its job. In November and December, record numbers of arrests made, a third of which through stop and search, 350 weapons seized, taken off streets.
You can bombard me with these numbers, and I just throw the number back at you. 80 people got stabbed last year, and it's gone up to the highest level since 2008.
And this is why I make the really important
point. It's not working, whatever it is that you're doing.
Yes and no. It takes some time for these strategies to take its course. Look, the police are being tough on knife crime, but we've got to realise we've got to be tough on the causes of knife crime. That means, for example, we've got to invest in young people, education, prevention, youth centres, in A&Es, in trauma centres, in role models, in getting influencers speaking to young people. Every time a young person chooses to pick up a knife, that is a failure. That's why there's a campaign to educate young people. Parents have a role to play. All of us have a role to play.
And yet there is this sense that the cuts have provided politicians like you with the mother of all fig leaves, because ultimately you can say things would be better if central government hadn't cut our budget and cut council budgets, because that impacts directly upon policing.
Well, let me give you an example of a non-politician. Today, the most senior officer in charge of organised crime, the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, never met this man. He has said today that as a consequence of government cuts, tackling organised crime is more difficult because of fewer neighbourhood officers. So put aside what I might say in self-interest in relation to police cuts. It ain't just police cuts. Police and probation, reoffending's going up. Look at youth services closing down. Look at education budgets being reduced. Look at mental health budgets being reduced. All this must have an effect. We know prevention must be better than enforcement. We're doing lots of work on enforcement, lots of work on prevention in the context of massive cuts to not just the police budget, but public services across London and across the country.
Have you had any successes in the context of knife crime and youth crime? Is there anything you would point to on your personal mayoral record as positive?
I think the police deserve a lot of credit for the arrests made, for intelligence use of stop and search. The biggest rollout of body-worn videos in the world is taking place in London. This should give confidence to the public when it comes to stop and search being done properly, but also confidence to police officers. Police officers will be supported when they use stop and search in this intelligent manner, and the body-worn video should give us all the reassurance we need to know stop and search is an invaluable tool. But with the best police service in the world, unless we prevent young people carrying knives, unless we educate them, we're still going to have a problem of having all our eggs in the enforcement basket rather than the prevention and education basket. That's why I use the phrase that, it takes a village to raise a child. And we have too many young people, too many children think it's cool, thinking it's respectful, thinking it's the right thing to do to carry a knife. That can't be right.
I was reading about a nightclub in Chelsea. I think it might have been Raffles, where residents nearby have been complaining about drug dealing going on in their kind of in their streets, appalling rowdiness, drunkenness, debauchery. Not much stop and search around there.
Well, actually, the biggest reason for stop and search is drugs. The second reason is knife crime. So if you look at the reason why police stop and search, they've got a reasonable suspicion. The biggest reason is
that's drugs. Kind of my point. You've got all these toffs falling out of nightclubs and allegedly buying cocaine in the basement areas of nearby flats. I don't hear about much stop and search going on in Kensington and Chelsea.
Well, I'd say to those residents, please ring the police, whether if it's criminality taking place in real time 999, otherwise 101, or ring Crime Stoppers, and the police will make sure they've got covert surveillance or police officers in uniforms on those streets. I
appreciate we're labouring this. And we must get more questions
it's
on.
It's important to understand.
Yeah. When you sit here a year from today, I don't know who'll be sitting in this chair, but you will still be sitting in that chair, and it's gone up again, you just say all the same things, won't you?
Well, no, I hope it's not gone up again.
We all hope it doesn't, but we hoped it didn't go up this year.
And we hope that some of the steps we've taken will help. But you can't disaggregate what's happening to knife crime with what's happening with crime generally and the cuts in public services generally. I'll give you another example. We have it's the same number of people regularly ringing 999, and many of them have mental health issues. The police are now dealing with issues that they shouldn't be dealing with, and in previous generations were dealt with by professional health workers and others as well. And we can't expect the police to pick up the pieces of cuts in public services. It is the case that cuts in mental health services, cuts in youth services, cuts in education services, cuts across the public sector having an impact on criminality. Violent crime across the country has gone up by something like 19%. In London, something like 3-4%. It's still not good enough.
Another question.
The next call, thank you for that call, Danny, and please, if you give your details to LBC, we'll make sure that Sophie or somebody meets with you. The next caller is Mel from Haywards Heath. Good morning, Mel.
Hi, Sadiq. I've just recently had a read about your Behind Every Great City campaign about gender equality, and I was wondering what you're going to be doing to protect and represent trans people within that wider campaign on gender equality.
Well, Mel, thanks for your call. I mean, the LGBT plus community and the trans community in particular will know the steps we've taken in relation to last year, the London plan, some of the steps we're doing to make sure when it comes to, for example, the availability of public toilets, consideration is given to bearing in mind that a large number of our citizens are trans Londoners whose needs aren't, recognised when it comes to public spaces. The campaign is particularly in relation to the celebrating 100 years since women first got the right to vote. Some women, by the way, first got the right to vote, recognising the progress made, but also redoubling the drive towards reducing gender inequality. Let me give you an amazing stat. James will tell me off for throwing stats at you. But, 20 years ago, the gender pay gap between men and women was 15.1% 20 years ago. Now that means men on average earned more than 15.1% more than women 20 years ago. Now the gender pay gap is 14.6%. We've reduced it by 0.5% in 20 years. So I'm going to use 100 years of celebrating women getting the right to vote as a springboard to go forward to reducing gender inequality and ultimately getting rid of it.
The question of protection is important as well. You will
really
know that there's a climate of abuse that we probably haven't seen since the homophobia of the 70s and the 80s. Trans have become an acceptable target, usually for angry, right-wing old men who are desperately always looking around for somebody vulnerable.
Not always older men, but
this is true.
I welcome, Mel, the announcement by Justin Greening to a consultation about looking at the whole issue of trans era. I think legislation hasn't moved quickly enough to protect trans people, and that's why it's important the consultation is swift and the government comes forward with legislative changes. The reality is, I think the current legislation, the Equalities Act and some of the old legislation doesn't address some of the challenges that the current generation of trans people are facing, and James alluded to them.
Speaking of decency in the public sphere, I'm going to hand you 7 tweets that were posted by the government's new universities advisor, Toby Young, and I'd like you to tell me whether you'd be prepared to read any of them out on live radio at 21 minutes after 10 on a Thursday morning.
I'm just reading them, sorry for the silence. No. It is astonishing that the government has appointed this man on the university regulatory body in the context of working class people, women, ethnic minorities, the LGBT plus community expressing concern about accessibility to the top universities. One of the people put on the new body to deal with this holds these sorts of views. By the way, no unambiguous apology from this man. No sort of, listen, what I said in the past was unforgivable. I'm really sorry.
He's a right of centre maverick.
Well,
that was what he described himself.
But this feeds into something that you regularly raise with me about this democracy. You've raised with me when I've been here the issue of the so-called close connection between Uber and senior members of the government. You've raised with me the issue of the deal done with West Ham and senior members of the previous mayoralty and the government. And this, again, is another example of the democracy that makes the British public sick to death of the British elite. And I think, it's astounding that Theresa May thinks it's okay for this man to be in that body. What confidence now will you have as a working class man or woman, as a woman thinking about going to university who's concerned about admissions policy, a gay man or woman, when you know this person has the confidence of Theresa May, the Prime Minister?
Defended by the Foreign Secretary, whose brother, of course, appointed Toby Young to this role.
Well, it's a theme that keeps coming back to this government, this
Toby
democracy.
Young, an associate editor of The Spectator, which used to be edited by Boris Johnson.
Well, absolutely. And this is not the first example of, jobs for mates. And I think what's important, though, is the public has confidence in those positions of
You're really
power
not
and
prepared to
influence.
read out one of them. There's one or two that are possibly... I appreciate we all have our own personal morality. Because these were public comments by a man appointed to advise our government on universities.
No, I'm not willing to do that.
Okay, next question.
The next question is from James from Sadiq. Good morning, James. Happy New Year.
Oh, morning to you, Sadiq. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to James.
Thank you.
Don't be nice to him, James. What's your question?
Sadiq, I've been in housing for over 35 years. I've negotiated affordable housing agreements with developers, and I've developed housing of all tenures. What I wanted to ask you was, I agree with you, therefore, that your targets to build affordable housing is as you call it, a marathon, not a sprint. So I'm agreed with you that we're not going to build our way out of the current crisis. But there's a couple of things I would seek to ask you.
Please.
You have funding. You are a funder. You own land, and you're a planning authority. They're the three arms of delivering homes. I hope you'll agree with that.
Definitely.
They're the three critical things.
Yep.
You're not having to go to a developer on your own land and try to negotiate based on what he views is market value for that site.
Sure.
You own the site.
Sure.
So my argument and question to you is, when are you going to take best consideration on land, instead challenge this issue that best consideration is top dollar in money, and argue that you should be getting the maximum affordable housing on your own site?
Let me do that directly. For those that aren't aware, James, so this is basically what happens is surplus public land is sold to the highest bidder. That's what James is alluding to. And so it depends how you define best consideration. I would argue, and so would James, best consideration is making sure you build homes that are genuinely affordable for Londoners. Others would argue it's getting the maximum bang for your buck. So, James, we've changed how we deal with surplus public land under my control. So what I'm not willing to do now is sell to the highest bidder, because once it's gone, it's gone. And you're selling the family silver. And often when it's gone, because the developer, as you know, has bought it for huge sums of money, he or she, not unreasonably, wants to build luxury flats to recoup the monies they've spent to build the land. So we're doing a number of things to try and reduce the value of land going up. One, on surplus public land I'm in charge of, the expectation is at least half the homes will be genuinely affordable. And as you know, I've changed the definition.
Expectation is a meaningless word in this context.
Well, no, I'm in charge of the planning. So I'm in charge.
Is it a requirement?
Yeah, quite.
A requirement?
So, correct. So
okay, not an expectation.
Surplus public land that I'm in charge of, a requirement that half will be genuinely affordable. Number two, I'm using the draft London plan, but also using SPD's local planning guidance to try and manage expectations of developers about what the expectation is. I'll give you one example, James, recently. Holloway Prison, surplus public land, not under my direct control, but with a very good council, Islington, we've made sure a future purchaser knows the expectation is, the planning requirements are, for half the homes in that piece of land to be genuinely affordable, my definition, rather than the
which
con
is,
from the government.
remind us?
Either social rent, council properties, or London living rent, 1/3 of average earnings, linked to earnings, not to market value, or 3 shared ownership, part by part rent.
That's the thing, isn't it? That relationship between earnings and market value.
Really
that's
important.
what's broken housing in this country.
That's the con. The con is this: you're told by government it's an affordable home. What does it mean? Either a home costing £500,000 in London,
because that percentile-wise will be in the lowest,
or 80% market value.
Got you.
Market value is market value of the rental or purchase property rather than what people earn. That's why you've seen this ridiculous situation in London. Average cost to buy a property, £408,000, which means you need a deposit of £80,000 to buy a property. So that's two parts of your answer. The third part is the funding I have. I've got £3.15 billion worth of funding I negotiated with the government. We're using that, James, to start 90,000 affordable homes by 2021. And those will be the affordable homes I've defined. And so we're using the monies I've got from government, but also, James, I've introduced a new revolving fund of £250 million, which means I'm helping local authorities buy parcels of land next to their own land, which can make a piece of land more viable for them to build more genuinely affordable homes. And the idea is they use this loan from me, They buy the land. When they build the homes, they can give it back to me, and I can then give it to another council to buy more land. One example last year in Waltham Forest, 100% of the homes that they're going to be built, 300 homes, will be genuinely affordable because of this revolving fund. So we are taking steps, James, but by myself it's difficult. Independent experts say we need to spend £2.7 billion a year on affordable homes. The government's given me £0.5 billion, so I need a fivefold increase to meet the needs of Londoners.
Again, I mean, I'm turning into a stuck record here, but again, you're perhaps fairly, but it is going to frustrate a lot of people listening that so many of the problems that you're presented with, you bat away in part by talking of central government funding. We
are the most centralised democracy in the Western world. I mean, let me give you one example. I get to spend 7 pence of taxes raised in London. New York is 50%, Tokyo is 70%. We need more devolution from government over a whole host of issues, including housing, including the NHS, including youth services, including the justice system. And my frustration is the lack of devolution.
How much of London's taxpayers' money goes to sort of funding the rest of the country?
A huge amount, which is fine. When I believe in the nation state. I don't believe we should have the unilaterally declare independence. I'm not saying London should be a city state. I think that, I believe in the broader shoulders carrying the greatest weight. But we should have more say over some of the monies raised in London, the business rates, monies raised in London, stamp duty raised in London, and other issues as well. I think it's right and proper. We help poorer parts of the country, but I think we should get a bigger share of monies raised in London, whether it's road tax or other issues.
Are you excited about getting a blue passport soon?
Well, I remember. I've still got my old black one, by the way. It was never blue, by the way. It was never blue, by the way. It was black, but no, not one of the things that gets me excited. Getting out of bed in the morning. James, thanks for your question. Next question is from Dean in Plymouth. Good morning, Dean.
Good morning, James. Good morning, Sadiq.
Hi, Dean.
Much respect to you. Happy New Year.
Good man.
I would like to ask your views. I worked on the railways for 5-6 years, and I've seen the railway system systematically over the last 5-6 years rip off the British public. And I would like your take. I mean, I'm a Labour man, but I would like your take on nationalisation, bearing in mind you got Crossrail coming in, etc.
Well, let me give you a good example of my personal experience. I was a minister in the Department for Transport when Andrew Adonis was the Secretary of State. And in 2009, East Coast Line, the company that ran it was called National Express, and they made a pig's ear of it. It was just awful. So rather than bailing them out, what Andrew Adonis did in the Department for Transport, and I'm very proud of the small role I played in this, took it back into public hands. So rather than bailing them out, took it back and said, National Express, you've done such a bad job, you shouldn't be getting any more franchises. And East Coast started making a profit for the taxpayer. So those monies raised because of the East Coast was used to improve a whole host of services across the public transport system and it's coming into Treasury coffers as well. What happened with this government? Because of ideological reasons, they gave a franchise to privatised companies, and lo and behold, before Christmas, they decided to bail out Stagecoach and Virgin to the tune of £2 billion.
This is money that they would have paid under the terms of the franchise that they bought, which they've now said they can't.
So hold on a sec. So when things are going well, you can keep the profits. When things go badly, taxpayer bails you out. And that's why, Dean, people are sick to death with politicians putting ideology over pragmatism. And that's why Andrew Adonis, one of the reasons why he's so livid, because think of the infrastructure this £2 billion could have paid for. Why is it that the taxpayer is bailing out two of arguably the richest men in the country? And so, look, I believe that,
Not arguably, for the record.
Well, I believe that Transport for London is a good example of public transport in public hands. Transport for London, under my control, is in charge of the buses, the tubes, DLR, London Overground, trams, and we do a good job. And so that's why I've been lobbying the government, Dean, saying let me run the commuter trains, Southeastern, Southwestern and Southern as well. They're saying no again for ideological reasons. And you know what? Cancellations, delays, fares going up would be a thing of the past if we ran them and stuff. So look, I think that I'm in favour of nationalising the rails. I think there's a big argument which is shown by how East Coast ran when it was in public hands from 2009 until privatised again, and how we're doing things in London.
A lot of your party leaders' fans believe that it's impossible to properly nationalise the railways while being in the European Union.
The way to do it, well, firstly, as you know, we'll be leaving shortly, but the way to do it is very simple. We wait for a franchise to come to an end. That's why it beggars belief what the government's done with East Coast. East Coast was in public hands. There was no need to privatise it again. So as a franchise comes to an end, rather than paying out the privatised company, which costs the taxpayer money, when it comes to an end, let's take it over. That's why I'm so frustrated with the government's U-turn on southern, southeastern and southwestern. The deal made between Boris Johnson and the government was when those franchises come to an end, TfL can take them over. All the evidence is we do a better job than the private companies. The government reneged on that deal.
You mentioned, I mentioned the Labour leader. The Labour leader but one, Tony Blair, speaking this morning, contradicting what you just said, actually. We will definitely be leaving the European Union, you said. He's called for a second referendum on whether to stay in. Now, everybody listening to this programme knows that in your heart of hearts you agree with him. You're now going to pretend in public that you don't.
No, listen. I campaign passionately to stay in the European Union. I think it's a. I wish we weren't leaving the European Union. I think the reality is that the government is negotiating our exit from the European Union. I think there is a way we can stay in the European Union, but I think that's lots of ifs and buts before we get there. I think the reality is the government's negotiating our exit. My criticism of the government is they've got no idea where they want to end up, which means it's hardly surprising the negotiations are such a mess.
And is Tony Blair's intervention helpful? I mean, you clearly disagree with him.
Well, look, Tony Blair wasn't just the leader of the Labour Party and a former Prime Minister. He's got huge experience, and so I think it's right and proper that he's, gives his views and stuff. I think it'd be wrong and improper for us to expect previous leaders and people with experience to just shut up and go away. I think if he's got an opinion, he should be allowed to express it.
Final question.
The final question is from Ed, also from Plymouth. Hi, Ed. Good morning.
Hi, Sadiq. So you've come in for a fair amount of online abuse, and a lot of it's been quite horrible. I was just wondering how you deal with that on a personal level, and what advice you have for anyone who is experiencing something like that.
Well, Ed, thanks for your question. Thanks for your question, Ed. It's a very nice question. Yeah, I mean, look, I get a lot of abuse. My concern is my family when they see it, and my staff, and it is upsetting. My staff report it when it's, when it crosses the line. Often it's offensive, not crossing the line, but it is offensive. People who should know better, and it's tough. And I can look after myself, but I worry about people who can't. Younger people. Not just. How
do you explain it to your kids? Because I've got this to come. Mine are younger than yours, and obviously the abuse I get is never quite as toxic as yours because I don't have brown skin. But it's in the same sort of ballpark. And I'm wondering how I explain it to my children.
I just remind them of all the loads and loads of people who are nice, and don't extrapolate from the small number of nasty people, the large number of really, really incredibly nice people. And they witnessed, and I say this not in an arrogant way, but the response I receive on the tube and the buses going around the city and stuff. So they know that the horrible stuff on the internet doesn't represent what people believe. But Ed, it is nasty. Some of it is vile. Some of it is criminal offence. Some of it is upsetting. And my worry is this, Ed. If you're, James alluded to the colour of my skin, but if you're a person of colour, if you're an ethnic minority, if you're a religious minority, if you're a woman, if you're somebody who doesn't like this sort of stuff, why would you think about being in the public eye? If you're a mum, dad, uncle, auntie, big brother, big sister, grandparent, why would you encourage a youngster to get involved in politics or in public life? Why would you encourage them to do so? And that's one of the reasons, Ed, many reasons why I was so motivated to win the mayoral election in 2016, because had we not have won, what sort of message would that have sent to others thinking about a career in politics or thinking about doing public good? And so, Ed, we are a wonderful country. There are some thoroughly decent, wonderful people in this country. And so my message to young people, and if you've been the victim of trolling and stuff, don't allow that to jaundice your view of the British public. The old saying used to be, James is an old bloke, he'll remember this, don't read below the comment section. You know, James? And it's the previous. So what was happening was when you used to write an article on the internet, you'd say, don't read below the comments because it's full of trolls and horrible people. Well, now I'm afraid those trolls and horrible people sometimes tweet, sometimes on Facebook, sometimes do other stuff, and we can't allow that to jaundice us.
They write articles for national newspapers, and some of them have got columns. But how do you sustain the notion that they're in a minority, these racist trolls, when their patron saint is in the White House?
Well, even and we can't. Again, I say it makes point. The numbers of Americans who would do one or two things, either give me a hug or apologise, is phenomenal, right? Don't allow the fact that the current occupant of the White House has the views that he has to jaundice your view of Americans or America. Look, he's the president. whether it's 1 term or 2 terms. But, you know, look at all the great things America's given us. If you've got a chance and you're very, very lucky, go and watch Hamilton and you'll see some of the great things America's given us.
Metropolitan elite. I can't get a ticket for
Ed, sorry, does that address your very kind question?
Sorry, last week, because we were already 7 minutes late for the news. That flew by. When are you back?
Whenever you have me back, James. Assuming you're still in the chair, I'll be back here next month, James, but with you or whoever's in that chair.
This is how rumours start. Mayor Sadiq Khan, many thanks indeed. 10:37 is the time. I suspect of all the stuff that we've just discussed, we might return to the knife crime question after the very latest news headlines with Simon Conway.
Almost 17,000 patients had to wait more than half an hour to be moved from ambulances to A&E departments in England over the Christmas week. The latest figures show that